Hey everyone, it's your friend and colleague Jesse Green. Welcome to the Savvy Dentist podcast. It's great to have your company for another episode of the show. Today I'm going to be talking about a topic that's incredibly near and dear to my heart, and that is how to create enterprise value in your practice. Now, I really believe that when you go into business, obviously there's something you want to achieve. Sometimes it's the type of dentistry that you want to do. Maybe it's the environment you want to create for your patients. Maybe it's the type of people that you want to work with, whether that's your patients, your team, or maybe it's just you want to create something of your own and build your own castle. Whatever it may be. Now, there'll be a bunch of reasons that people go into business, whether they're commercial reasons or other reasons. Now, in this particular podcast, I'm going to be talking about how to create enterprise value, how to increase the value of your asset. I totally understand that there are many reasons why you'd have your own business, but I am firmly of the view also that business can and should be a force for good. I believe that we put our capital at risk and therefore we are entitled to return on that capital. I believe that we are the ones who spend most of our time thinking about a business, dreaming about a business, managing all the problems, dealing with the headaches, and therefore we've got to be compensated by that. Now, we can be compensated financially in a couple of different ways. Now, the first way we're compensated is through the income we earn from the practice, and the second way is by maximizing the value of the asset. And I want to hone in specifically on the asset value maximization. So before we get into that, just before I get the hate mail, is that there are many ways to measure success. There's fulfillment, there's time with family, there's all of those different metrics. And I'm all for all of those things. But today I'm going to talk a lot about money. So please understand that I acknowledge the other currencies, but we're focusing in today about the finances. So when you come to value a business, the value of a business is typically calculated one of several ways. The most common way is by timesing the repeatable sustainable earnings by a multiple. And I'll talk about that multiple really quickly. The multiple has two key components. It consists of the growth opportunities left in the practice, or indeed the risk is the second factor there. So that's how the multiple is dealt with. And the income, or the earnings, I should say, the repeatable sustainable earnings is a really important piece as well. So I want to just linger on the definition of repeatable and sustainable. The idea of repeatable sustainable earnings is you want to have certainty, if not a guarantee, that those earnings are going to continue into the future. And what that means is when you're building value in your business, you're ultimately preparing it for sale. Now, you may never sell it, and that's okay, but you want to maximize the value of your asset along the way. And so what's really important to understand that from a buyer's point of view, they want to have some level of confidence that those earnings are going to not just continue into the future, but hopefully grow into the future. And when they've got confidence around those earnings moving into the future, that's when they're likely to open their wallets and pay a premium for your business. So when it comes to the earnings of the practice, there's a few key things I just want to mention. I've already spoken about repeatable and sustainable, and let's talk about what drives repeatability and sustainability. Repeatability and sustainability is typically generated by repeat business. And repeat business is almost baked into a dental practice because you have a recall system, you have those natural processes for bringing your patients back again and again and again. Now, I understand that for some practices, particularly specialty practices, you might have one and done treatments for your patients. You know, maybe it's a one and done endo treatment, or maybe it's a one and done orthodontic treatment, or 4x8s, or whatever it is. In that situation, you'd be looking to have repeatable, sustainable business coming from your referrers. So the referrals would be your repeatable, sustainable business. Now, equally, you could argue that if you've got a great marketing funnel, you're getting repeatable, sustainable business through your marketing activities, that's okay too. But I want to make the point that for most practices, having patients come back again and again and again is what creates the repeatability and the sustainability of income. Yes, there are exceptions to that. I acknowledge that. But for the vast majority of practices that live under the bell curve, that's where we're going to be playing. So we need to make sure that we have operational systems that are really tight to make sure your patients come back again and again, whether it's your recall system, your system for following up your cancellations, your system for following up incomplete treatment, and so on. All of those leaks in the database need to be plugged. Now, another thing I want to mention about the earnings. Of course, earnings are often calculated by taking the revenue of the practice, less the expenses, and figuring out what the cash flow is. And cash flow is influenced, yes, by your income, yes, by minimizing your expenses, your cost of goods, as well as your operational expenses. But your earnings are also influenced by a couple of things on your balance sheet too, managing accounts receivable, accounts payable, inventory days as well. So I'm not going to get into that too much, but it's important that you understand how cash flow is created and pay attention to those elements that are located on both your P&L as well as your balance sheet. Very important. let's just talk about driving revenue for a moment, because I want to give you a couple of things that will help you drive your revenue forward. And then I want to have a bit of a conversation about different types of revenue. So if you want to increase your revenue, you've kind of got three big levers to pull. You can see more patients. You say get more people through the door. You can see those same patients more frequently. So instead of coming back once a year, get them back twice a year, and so on and so forth. And equally, you can increase the size of the transaction, the average dollar transaction size. So instead of having them spend $100, maybe we can have them spend $110. And there's a whole variety of strategies around that. But the beauty of those three strategies is they compound. And so I like to say that small hinges swing big doors. So if you could make small changes in each of those three areas, they're going to compound out and your earnings are going to increase. And that's really important. So having a system for reliably and predictably increasing your revenue so that it flows through to your bottom line, to your earnings, is again really key. But I do want to make a note about different types of revenue, because not all revenue is the same. And so one of the challenges I see dentists facing a lot is understanding that they kind of get a bit dependent upon personal exertion income. And what that means is they're usually the highest biller. And they might have a very particular set of skills, as Liam Neeson might say. They have a very particular set of skills in dentistry, at least, right? And so they can bill really well. But the problem is if they're the star performer, if they're generating the lion's share of the revenue, you've got a couple of associates and maybe a therapist or two making up the balance, then there's not a lot of value created in the business, because the business is too dependent upon the principal for revenue generation. And so what happens is that often the principal doesn't want to take time out of their appointment book because they see that as lost opportunity. But that time should be taken out of the appointment book in order to train other dentists or therapists or whoever, so that they can become revenue generators in their own right. And when you have a string of revenue generators, ultimately you're creating value in the business. But most dentists are reluctant to take that time out. It's like shifting gears in a car, right? They're kind of driving down the highway in second gear and they're burning the engine out and it's really revving it in the red line. But in order to go further and go faster, you've got to actually change gear. And that involves taking your foot off the accelerator, engaging the clutch, shifting gear, and then re-accelerating. But it's when you take your foot off the accelerator, in other words, when you take time away from the chair, that most dentists get a little bit of the heebie-jeebies and panic a little bit, and they go back to what they know. The most successful practice owners I know that have built huge value in their business and have been able to scale are the ones that have been able to take time away from their own chair and take the time to develop protocols and processes and a talent development pipeline so they can bring young dentists into their practice, have them become really proficient as quickly as possible, and become productive too. Now, what that gives you is not just a diversified revenue stream, that which is obviously awesome. What it gives you is an insulation against loss of practitioners. Because if you've got people that come and go from your practice, and that's normal, you want to be able to bring someone in and get them up to speed really quickly rather than leaving revenue holes in the practice. And again, taking the time to do that adds not just enterprise value, which is kind of what we're talking about now, it also gives you peace of mind as well, so you don't feel like you've got to tolerate things or worry if someone's going to leave and so on and so forth. So there's many good reasons to build training systems into your practice to upskill young dentists and help them become proficient and productive as quickly as possible. Now, the second thing I want to mention about income as well is what I'm going to call is special services income is fine. Now, it's if you have a whole team of people that can do special services income, let me just use a procedure that's pretty hot at the moment. That's all on four. If you have a training system that teaches people how to do all on four to a high standard in your practice and you're getting great results, then that's great. That will add enterprise value to your business because you've now built a process and a system. And again, it's not dependent upon you. But one of the things that I see is you'll see a practice owner who has a very particular skill set, as I said, maybe it's in this case all on four, and they're billing and billing and billing and billing. But when they go to value the practice, that portion of the income is not going to be valued as highly because it is just too key person dependent. And that portion of the revenue is likely going to disappear when the principal leaves the practice, right? So again, as a purchaser, you're going to discount that revenue as heavily as possible because you know that as soon as the principal leaves, that revenue is walking out the door as well. So again, it's understanding what's the repeatable, sustainable earnings of the practice. So again, when it comes to a few of those things, we also need to look at the P&L and the balance sheet, manage expenses, and so on and so forth, like I mentioned before. I'd probably also just encourage you to be really cognizant of how you spend your money. It's about understanding what's a need versus what's a want. One of the things that I see in most dental practices is enormous waste, whether it's duplicate materials or whether it's a piece of equipment that was a good idea at the time but now is not being used. All of that equates to money that could be in your back pocket. And so again, spend that money judiciously. Obviously make the investments you need to make in terms of capital equipment and materials. Use the best stuff that you love, but just make sure you use it, right? Don't let it sit and go to waste. So that's really what I wanted to say there. Now, let's talk a little bit about the multiple for a minute. Now, I want to talk a little bit about growth for a second. And really growth relates to how quickly is the business growing? How likely is it to continue growing? Do we have the capacity in place to capitalize on that growth? Where are we going to get crunched from a capacity point of view as well? So one of the things that I always like to think about from a capacity point of view is you want a little bit of capacity to grow into. I'm often reminded of when I was a little fella, my mum would go and buy me some shoes and she'd always be squeezing where my big toe was in the shoe to make sure there's a bit of room to grow into, but not so much room that the shoes were flapping around. It's a bit like that in the dental practice too. You want to have some room to grow into, but also not so much room that you've got capacity kind of being wasted. So you need to be able to understand what your rate of growth is. And the way you might measure that is by looking at your active patient numbers month on month and comparing that from one month to the next by also taking into account the new patient flow. So let me give you an example. If I have 100 active patients at the beginning of the month and I have 10 new patients throughout the month, by the beginning of the next month, hopefully I've got 110 active patients. Now, I may have lost a patient or two, whatever the churn rate has been in there, but that's how you do that. Now, if you don't have 110, you've got to ask yourself, where did those patients go and have I got a reasonable explanation for that? I see lots of patients leaking out of practices all the time and the practice owner has no idea where they've gone to or why they're going or what system is broken down or any of those sorts of things. And again, that's part of your repeatable sustainable earnings. But if you know that your active patient numbers are growing at a certain rate, you can pretty reasonably predict when you're going to need to add capacity into the practice, whether it's an extra chair, it's extending hours, or maybe you've got a chair, you just need to open up another day. That's going to influence your hiring processes and so on. But from an enterprise value point of view, you want to be able to have predictable growth. You need to be able to say, this is where we've been in the last 18 months, 12 months, 6 months now, and this is where we anticipate being 6 months, 12 months, 18 months from now. And so that gives the new practice owner, the purchaser, confidence that there's still some uplift in the practice as well. So again, you want to be able to manage growth. The thing that really influences the multiple a lot though is risk. And of course, there's a couple of different types of risks. There's risks that you can control and there's risks that you can't control. And COVID was a great risk of things that we can't control. No one could control COVID. Yes, we could have some things in place that would buffer us from the effects of COVID, making sure we had ample cash buffers and so on and so forth. But in terms of COVID itself, we didn't control how the disease came into the country or how the country reacted to it. So we need to make sure that we understand some of those things that we can't control. And that might be things like the economy, it might be competitors, it could be the regulatory environment. Any of those sorts of things can impact how we perform on a day-to-day basis. What I would say to you around that, though, is to make sure that you have layers of safety built into your practice for those unexpected events. And when it came to COVID, where most people came unstuck in COVID is by having too much debt and not enough cash buffer. And so I would say to you that as you go through your business, there'll be times to take on debt and there'll be times to pay off debt. And there'll be times to make sure you have a lot of cash in your bank for a rainy day. And so I always say to people, manage those two levers really, really carefully. You want to make sure that you have a nice financial moat around you so that you're safe, you're untouchable, and that moat is deep, wide, stocked with crocodiles so that no one can hurt you. And from a young age, I've always really loved having layers and layers of safety in the financial sense. Now, when it comes to other risks, the risks that you can control, there's a couple of really key risks. And the biggest one of all is what I'd call single point failure or single point sensitivity. And I suppose when we talk about single point sensitivity, the most common type of single point sensitivity is key person risk. And we all know what that means. It means having too much invested in one person. Now, usually that key person is you, the practice owner, right? You're usually the one generating a lion's share of the revenue. And if you're generating 50, 60% of the revenue, there's a lot of risk around you, right? If you fall over and hurt yourself, you're in a bit of a pickle. So over time, you want to reduce key person dependency as much as you can across the practice. Now, I've already touched on how to do it for yourself. That would be to develop other providers so that your relative contribution to the income decreases, whereas the total income is increasing, right? So I really like to see your contribution less than 25%, as little as possible, basically, but your revenue increasing at the same time because you're building on the talents of other providers. Now, that's one type of key person risk. Another type of key person risk, that could be having too much in your practice manager, too much knowledge in your practice manager. It could be not having a great relationship with some of your team members who are really productive, and that leaves you exposed to them walking out the door. So there is a whole different variety of key person risk. Now, the number one way to mitigate key person risk is what I indicated earlier. That's having the capability to recruit great people, onboard them really well, train them really well, and get them productive as quickly as possible, so that should anyone leave the business, you can plug and play a new person as quickly as possible. The second way to mitigate that key person risk, though, is to build understudies into the practice as well. So if you've got a practice manager, who's going to be their understudy? If the practice manager were to be hit by the proverbial bus, we'd all mourn and be sad about the individual, but the business has to go on. So how do we have a understudy? How do we make sure the show goes on? Is it our front desk coordinator that steps into the PM role temporarily? You want them to be able to do at least 75 or 80% of the role to 80% of the standard, basically. So again, they can do the essential things and keep the lights on. That we're not trying to replace the practice manager at the moment. We're just trying to keep the lights on until we can find a new person to step into that role more permanently. So again, that's key person risk. But there is another single point sensitivity that I want to discuss, and this is going to perhaps ruffle a feather or two, and that is around patient flow. If you're getting all your patients from one source, you are absolutely at risk of having your business disrupted, because if all of your eggs are in that one basket and that basket gets tipped over, then guess what? Your patient flow is severely damaged. And so the way I see this is particularly in preferred provider practices. Now, I know that some people argue that preferred provider practices are more valuable, but when you think about it, it's a form of single point sensitivity. It's about making sure that, we're getting all of our patients from whichever health fund that sends them our way. Now, just to be clear, before, again, I get the hate mail, I'm not anti-preferred providers necessarily. What I'm anti is the reasons why people take on those relationships. And let me just explain what I mean by that for a moment. Most people take on preferred provider relationships because they want to abdicate the responsibility for learning to generate patient flow. Now, I'm absolutely very firmly of the view that as a business owner, your number one responsibility is you've got to be able to attract new business on your own. If you're a hunter, you don't eat unless you hunt something, right? And it's the same in business. If you can't generate business for yourself, whether it's through marketing or sales, you don't eat. And so to outsource that to someone else, to me, feels like abdication rather than delegation. And now, again, I know some people are going to say, but Jesse, the reduced fee structure is what I'd spend on marketing anyway. Now, I would argue that you're spending a lot on marketing if that's the case, but I can accept that argument for now. That's okay. But irrespective of that, you should be developing other streams of patient flow. You should continue to market your practice. You should continue to be interested in marketing and how to present cases and all those other sorts of things, rather than just relying on this passive stream of patients coming to you because they've been told to go to you because of the health fund. Now, I understand that's going to probably ruffle a few feathers. I know some people are going to say, yeah, but Jesse, you don't get it. I do get it. I understand the attraction. I understand the attraction of having people coming through your door. It's seductive. But the problem is you're taking on risk. And health funds can and do change the rules. Oftentimes, they don't increase their rebates while your costs are going through the roof, and you're stuck with thinner margins than you ever had before, but you're stuck there because you haven't built another source of patient flow. So you end up tolerating things because you're now effectively putting your finger in the mousetrap and hoping the trap doesn't snap down on your finger. So if you are in a preferred provider relationship, I would encourage you to diversify your source of patient flow. Learn to market. Understand how marketing works. Be responsible for generating patients beyond that relationship with the preferred provider. Make sure you get good at that, because I guarantee you at some point you're going to be glad that you did. Now, I don't know what shape or form that's going to take, But I can guarantee you at some point you're going to go, thank goodness I've got that other source of patients. Thank goodness I took the time to learn how to market. Thank goodness I learned how to generate revenue for myself and to feed myself, feed my family. So I'm not becoming reliant on anyone else. One of the greatest things of being in business is to be autonomous. It's about being sovereignty of your own business, right? If you don't have the ability to generate patient flow, you don't have sovereignty over your own business. You're just, again, you are beholden to someone else. And for me, I never want to be beholden to anyone else in my business. So again, that's just my perspective on that. And again, some of you will disagree. That's okay. But please do heed the warning. Please do understand that it is important to go and get other streams of patients, other sources of patient flow is essential if you want to de-risk your business. So equally, let's get back to the formula now. The value of the business is the repeatable, sustainable earnings times the multiple. Now, we've spoken about the earnings side of the equation. We've spoken about the multiple side of the equation. And as I said, my big hope for each of you is if you're in business, you have put capital on the line, whether you've taken out a loan or whether you've invested your own savings, you've put something of yourself financially into the business. Not only have you put something of your money into the business, you've put your time, your attention, your effort. You've taken time away from family, most likely at some point, in order to support this business. I want to make sure that this business gives you a return. Now, again, I've mentioned that the two financial returns you're going to get is firstly the income, and the second one is by maximizing the value of the asset. So I hope you find this episode helpful, and I look forward to seeing you another time soon. Take care. Bye now. Hey everyone, it's Jesse here. I hope you enjoyed that episode of the podcast. If you're looking for some more tools, some more insights, some more inspiration to help you create a practice that you love, as well as a life that you love, well, head across to savvydentist.com and check out all the goodies that we have there waiting for you right now.